Sometimes the loudest truth begins with the smallest unanswered question. The flashing blue and red lights reflected across the rain-soaked pavement as cars slowed to a cautious crawl along Highway 41 just outside Savannah, Georgia. Wind carried the scent of wet asphalt through the cool evening air, while distant thunder rolled across the dark horizon. Drivers passing by could only see silhouettes, a patrol cruiser, a silver sedan resting on the shoulder, and several officers carefully securing the scene. No one outside the yellow tape knew exactly what had happened. Rumors spread faster than facts. Someone whispered that a routine traffic stop had ended in tragedy. Another insisted there had been a misunderstanding. Before sunrise, social media was already filled with opinions, edited clips, and headlines that seemed certain long before any investigation had even begun. Yet one detail refused to disappear. Resting beside the driver's door was a small gift box wrapped in bright blue paper, untouched despite the steady drizzle, its ribbon fluttering softly in the wind as if waiting for someone to come back and pick it up. Hours later, television anchors repeated the same limited statement while commentators argued over fragments of information. Some defended the officer immediately. Others demanded answers. But none of them knew the woman behind the wheel. They did not know her name was Naomi Brooks. They did not know she spent her weekdays teaching third graders how to read and her weekends volunteering at a neighborhood learning center for military families whose parents were deployed overseas. They did not know the blue package contained a handmade birthday scrapbook for her 8-year-old niece, filled with drawings from every student in her classroom. They only knew a headline. Across town, the lights inside Brookside Elementary remained on long after dismissal. Construction paper butterflies still decorated the hallway walls, and colorful thank you notes covered the bulletin board outside room 12. One by one, teachers arrived carrying flowers instead of lesson plans. The principal stood silently near the classroom door, staring at Naomi's neatly written schedule still taped beside the whiteboard. Her favorite coffee mug remained on the desk exactly where she had left it that afternoon. A stack of spelling quizzes waited to be graded. Nothing inside the room suggested that life had changed forever in a single evening. At the county sheriff's office, Officer Daniel Mercer sat alone beneath harsh fluorescent lights. His uniform looked immaculate, but the silence around him felt unusually heavy. Investigators moved quietly through nearby offices, exchanging folders instead of opinions. Every clock seemed louder than normal. Mercer replayed the evening repeatedly in his mind, searching for certainty inside memories that already felt blurred by flashing lights and adrenaline. Outside, reporters gathered behind barricades while camera crews adjusted their lenses toward the building's entrance, hoping someone would finally speak. No one noticed a black SUV parked several blocks away. Inside sat a tall man in a navy windbreaker reading an old newspaper clipping about a community literacy program. He folded the article carefully before looking toward the sheriff's office with calm, thoughtful eyes. His phone vibrated once. A single message appeared on the screen. "We need everyone here by morning." He quietly locked the phone, started the engine, and drove into the rain. 10 hours earlier, before storm clouds gathered over coastal Georgia, and before television crews searched for answers they did not yet have, Naomi Brooks unlocked the door to room 12 with the same quiet smile she carried every weekday morning. The hallway still smelled faintly of fresh floor wax and sharpened pencils. Sunlight poured through the classroom windows, painting long golden rectangles across colorful reading rugs where 22 children would soon begin another school day. Naomi placed her canvas tote on her desk, straightened a stack of picture books, and quietly wrote the day's message across the whiteboard in neat blue letters. Kindness is something you practice, even when nobody is watching. She stepped back, reading the sentence for a moment before nodding to herself. It was not simply a lesson for her students. It was the way she had chosen to live. By 7:30, the building buzzed with cheerful voices. Children hurried through the hall carrying oversized backpacks, while parents exchanged quick waves before rushing toward work. Every student who entered Naomi's classroom received the same warm greeting, whether they arrived excited, sleepy, nervous, or distracted. She somehow remembered every birthday, every favorite book, every allergy, and every dream they had shared during quiet reading circles. When little Mason struggled through a paragraph, Naomi never corrected him with frustration. She simply pulled a chair beside him and whispered, "Take your time. Good readers become great readers one page at a time." Across the room, a framed photograph rested on a bookshelf. It showed dozens of smiling children gathered beside volunteers wearing military uniforms during last summer's literacy camp. Many of those volunteers had served overseas. Naomi had organized the program after discovering how often children from military families changed schools because of new assignments. She believed every child deserved at least one classroom that always felt like home, even if home itself kept moving across the country. That afternoon, after the final bell echoed through Brookside Elementary, several students remained behind to finish a surprise project. Colored markers covered every table. Construction paper scraps scattered across the floor like autumn leaves. Each child carefully decorated a page that would become part of a scrapbook for Naomi's niece, Emma, whose 9th birthday celebration was scheduled for the following evening. "Do you think she will like it?" one student asked while carefully drawing balloons beside a handwritten note. Naomi smiled as she gently closed a bottle of glue. "She will love it because every page was made with kindness." As parents arrived for pickup, the children proudly handed Naomi the finished scrapbook. She wrapped it carefully inside bright blue paper, tied a matching ribbon around the box, and placed it gently on the passenger seat of her silver sedan before leaving the school parking lot. She still planned to stop by her mother's house to pick up homemade peach cobbler before driving to her sister's home. It was an ordinary Thursday filled with ordinary plans, the kind people rarely remember until ordinary moments suddenly become priceless memories. As evening settled across the highway, Naomi adjusted the radio to a station playing classic soul music, humming softly while windshield wipers brushed away the first light drops of rain. She had no idea that somewhere several miles ahead, another ordinary evening was quietly preparing to change countless lives before the night was over. Several miles north of Brookside Elementary, Officer Daniel Mercer adjusted the collar of his uniform as the evening briefing came to an end inside the Chatham County Sheriff's substation. Rain tapped softly against the station windows while dispatch radios filled the room with routine calls about stalled vehicles, minor traffic accidents, and neighborhood complaints. Mercer listened with the quiet confidence of someone who believed experience had prepared him for every situation the road could present. During his 14 years on patrol, he had built a reputation for acting quickly, and many supervisors praised him for making decisions without hesitation. To younger deputies, that confidence looked like leadership. To a handful of veteran officers, however, it sometimes looked dangerously close to certainty. Mercer rarely questioned his first impression of a situation. Once his mind settled on a conclusion, changing it became difficult. Sergeant Linda Alvarez had noticed that habit more than once. Earlier that afternoon, she had reviewed several recent traffic reports before placing a thin folder on Mercer's desk. "Slow down before you decide what you are looking at," she had said in a calm voice. "Every driver has a story you cannot see through a windshield." Mercer answered with a polite smile that ended the conversation without truly accepting the advice. He respected Sergeant Alvarez, but deep inside, he believed hesitation created unnecessary risk. As his shift began, he climbed into his patrol vehicle and completed the same routine he had followed hundreds of times before. He checked the emergency equipment, verified the dashboard camera, tested the radio, and entered his patrol zone into the onboard computer. Everything appeared normal. Outside, steady rain transformed the highway into long ribbons of reflected headlights, each passing vehicle leaving shimmering trails across the dark pavement. Drivers reduced their speed as visibility continued to fade. Mercer pulled onto Highway 41, watching traffic move through the storm with careful attention. He noticed expired registration stickers, broken taillights, and distracted drivers almost instinctively. Years of patrol had trained his eyes to search for details other people ignored. Yet the same habit sometimes encouraged assumptions before complete information had a chance to emerge. At nearly the same moment, Naomi Brooks merged onto the same highway several miles behind him, her windshield wipers moving in quiet rhythm while the carefully wrapped birthday gift rested safely on the passenger seat beside her. She remained unaware that their paths were gradually moving toward the same stretch of road. In another part of the county, Commander Ethan Hayes finished reviewing paperwork inside a modest Veterans Community Center where volunteers had spent the afternoon organizing books for children whose parents were serving overseas. Before locking the building, he paused beside a framed photograph taken during last summer's literacy camp. Naomi stood in the center of the picture, surrounded by smiling children holding colorful storybooks. Hayes smiled quietly. She always remembered every child's name, one volunteer remarked while turning off the lights. Hayes nodded. Some people serve this country without ever wearing a uniform. He stepped outside into the cool evening air, unaware that before sunrise the next morning, that simple photograph would become one of the most requested images by news organizations across the state. Back on Highway 41, the rain intensified. Visibility narrowed. Dispatch transmitted another routine update across the county radio system. Mercer acknowledged the call, tightened his grip on the steering wheel, and noticed a silver sedan traveling steadily through the mist ahead of him. Nothing about the vehicle seemed extraordinary at first glance. Yet within moments a single observation would convince him to activate his emergency lights, setting into motion a chain of events that would soon place an entire community under the weight of questions no one could answer that night. Naomi noticed the flashing lights in her rearview mirror almost immediately and eased her foot off the accelerator. She checked her speed, glanced at her mirrors, and carefully guided the silver sedan onto the wide shoulder of Highway 41. Rain continued to fall in soft waves across the windshield, while passing vehicles created long streams of mist that disappeared into the darkness. She switched on her hazard lights, took a slow breath, and reached into the center console for her driver's license and vehicle registration. Years earlier, her father had given her one piece of advice whenever she encountered a traffic stop. Stay calm, keep your hands where they can be seen, and let respect speak before words do. Naomi remembered those words almost automatically. She placed both hands lightly on top of the steering wheel and waited. Behind her, Officer Daniel Mercer stepped out of his patrol vehicle, pulling the collar of his rain jacket higher against the wind. His flashlight reflected across wet pavement before its beam settled briefly on Naomi's rear license plate and then on the driver's side window. Dispatch crackled quietly through the radio attached to his shoulder, but Mercer barely seemed to notice. His attention remained fixed on the sedan. He paused for a brief moment, studying the interior through rain-speckled glass before approaching. Naomi lowered the window several inches as cool evening air drifted into the car, carrying the scent of rain and pine trees. "Good evening, officer," she said in a calm voice. "My license and registration are ready if you would like them." Mercer nodded without returning the greeting immediately. His flashlight moved across the dashboard, the passenger seat, and finally rested for a second on the neatly wrapped blue gift box secured by the seat belt. "Where are you headed tonight?" he asked. "To my sister's house in Savannah," Naomi answered. Politely, "Tomorrow is my niece's birthday." Mercer accepted the documents and examined them beneath the flashlight. Everything appeared current. Naomi waited quietly without making unnecessary movements. The silence stretched longer than she expected. Rain tapped steadily against the roof, while another line of headlights passed on the highway only a few yards away. Mercer looked back toward his patrol vehicle, then again at Naomi, as though trying to reconcile something that did not fit his expectations. "Please remain where you are," he said before walking back through the rain. Naomi watched him from inside the car, her fingers still resting gently on the steering wheel. She could not hear the conversation taking place over his radio, but she noticed his posture becoming increasingly rigid. Several minutes passed. The windshield slowly fogged around the edges as the heater continued blowing warm air through the cabin. The birthday gift remained untouched beside her, its blue ribbon reflecting faintly beneath the dashboard lights. Farther down the highway, a delivery truck's dashboard camera silently recorded every passing mile as it approached the same stretch of road. Its driver never imagined that ordinary recording would later become one of the most carefully examined pieces of evidence in the county. Mercer returned once more, stopping beside Naomi's window. His expression had hardened into something difficult to read. Naomi looked at him with the same steady composure she had shown from the beginning. "Officer," she said gently, "is everything all right?" Before he answered, another patrol vehicle appeared in the distance, its emergency lights glowing through the rain like blurred red and blue stars, while somewhere several counties away Commander Ethan Hayes looked down at his vibrating phone, read a single urgent message, and immediately reached for his car keys without knowing that the name appearing on the screen belonged to someone whose quiet kindness had changed hundreds of lives. The second patrol vehicle rolled quietly onto the shoulder, its flashing lights casting long reflections across the rain-soaked highway without adding a single word to the silence already hanging in the air. Deputy Aaron Collins stepped out, glanced toward Officer Mercer, then toward the silver sedan where Naomi Brooks remained seated exactly as instructed. Her hands still rested visibly on the steering wheel. The blue gift box remained secured beside her, its ribbon gently shifting each time the heater pushed warm air through the cabin. Collins immediately noticed how still everything looked. There were no raised voices, no frantic movements, only steady rain tapping against metal and glass. Mercer spoke briefly with Collins in a voice too low for Naomi to hear. Collins looked toward the vehicle once more before quietly asking, "Did dispatch confirm everything?" Mercer answered with a short nod, although his expression remained tense. Inside her car, Naomi watched the exchange through the rain-covered window. She could not understand the conversation, but she recognized uncertainty when she saw it. She slowly lowered her window another inch as Mercer approached again. "Officer," she said with the same calm tone she had maintained from the beginning, "if there is anything you need from me, I will cooperate." Mercer looked at her license once more before returning his attention to the vehicle. His flashlight briefly swept across the dashboard, the floorboard, and the back seat. Every ordinary object seemed to receive extraordinary attention beneath the narrow beam of white light. The quiet stretched uncomfortably. Cars continued passing at reduced speed, their tires hissing across the wet pavement. Several drivers turned their heads for only a second before disappearing into the darkness, unaware they had witnessed the beginning of a story that would soon reach every television station in the state. Without warning, another burst of radio traffic interrupted the silence. Dispatch requested an update. Mercer acknowledged the transmission but offered only a few carefully chosen words before placing the radio back on his shoulder. Collins studied his partner's face with growing concern. Experience had taught him that uncertainty often demanded patience rather than speed. "Let us slow this down," Collins said quietly enough that only Mercer could hear. "Everything looks calm." Mercer did not respond immediately. Rainwater rolled from the brim of his cap as he stared toward Naomi's vehicle, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. Inside the sedan, Naomi thought about calling her sister to explain the delay, but she decided against reaching for her phone without permission. She simply waited, believing the stop would end once the remaining questions had been answered. The minutes felt unusually long. Somewhere behind the line of passing traffic, the driver of a commercial delivery truck continued traveling through the storm. Mounted above the windshield, the dashboard camera captured every mile without emotion or opinion, recording only what unfolded before it. Neither the driver nor the trucking company had any reason to imagine that those quiet digital files would later become central to an official investigation. Several counties away, Commander Ethan Hayes pulled into the parking lot of the Veterans Community Center after receiving the unexpected message. He unlocked the front door, walked directly to a storage cabinet, and removed a thick binder labeled Community Volunteers. Flipping through photographs and attendance records, he stopped when he reached Naomi Brooks's name. Beside it were handwritten notes from military families thanking her for years of patient service to their children. Hayes slowly closed the binder, his expression growing more solemn. Back on Highway 41, the rain finally began to ease, but the weight in the air only grew heavier. Then the silence shattered as urgent voices suddenly echoed across multiple police radios at once. And within moments, every ordinary assumption about the traffic stop gave way to questions that would demand answers far beyond that lonely stretch of highway. Morning arrived beneath a blanket of low-gray clouds that muted the sunlight over Savannah, and the entire city seemed to move more quietly than usual. Outside Brookside Elementary, bouquets of fresh flowers rested against the brick sign, while handwritten notes from students fluttered gently in the cool breeze. Parents stood together without speaking much, holding their children's hands a little tighter than they had the day before. Inside room 12, every chair remained exactly where Naomi Brooks had left it. The lesson written across the whiteboard had not been erased. Kindness is something you practice, even when nobody is watching. Those words now carried a weight no one could have imagined only 24 hours earlier. The principal walked slowly through the empty classroom, pausing beside Naomi's desk where the family photograph, the favorite coffee mug, and the stack of ungraded spelling quizzes remained untouched. Nothing inside the room looked unusual, yet everything felt different. Across town, the Brooks family gathered at a quiet church surrounded by towering oak trees draped in Spanish moss. Rainwater still clung to the branches, occasionally falling in soft drops onto the stone walkway below. Friends, neighbors, former students, fellow teachers, and military families filled the pews long before the service began. Many carried children's drawings instead of flowers. Crayon hearts, handwritten thank you notes, and simple messages covered with colorful stickers rested beside framed photographs of Naomi smiling with her students during reading days, science fairs, and community book drives. 8-year-old Emma carefully placed the blue birthday gift on a small table near the front of the sanctuary. The ribbon remained perfectly tied because it had never been opened. She gently touched the corner of the package before stepping back beside her mother, her eyes never leaving it. The silence inside the church felt almost sacred, interrupted only by the quiet sound of an old piano playing a familiar hymn. Commander Ethan Hayes entered through the back doors without seeking attention. He removed his cap, signed the guest book, and quietly took a seat near several military families whose children Naomi had tutored over the years. One father leaned toward him and whispered, "She never asked whether we could afford the program. She only asked what books our kids like to read." Hayes lowered his eyes and nodded. He remembered evenings when Naomi stayed hours beyond schedule, helping children whose mothers or fathers were deployed overseas. She never spoke about recognition. She only cared that every child believed someone was waiting for them when they opened a book. At the county sheriff's office, the atmosphere was equally quiet but for entirely different reasons. Investigators reviewed reports, synchronized timestamps, and requested every available recording connected to the previous evening. Officer Daniel Mercer remained separated from normal patrol duties while procedures continued. No accusations were announced publicly. No conclusions had been reached. Yet everyone inside the building understood that every minute detail now mattered. Truth would not be determined by rumors or headlines, but by facts gathered patiently and completely. As the church service came to a close, sunlight finally slipped through the clouds, casting a warm beam across the blue gift box resting beside Naomi's photograph. No one spoke for several long seconds. The silence itself became a tribute to a life defined by compassion rather than recognition. Outside, parked quietly along the opposite side of the street, several dark vehicles arrived one after another. The men and women stepping out wore simple civilian clothing, avoiding cameras and attention. They exchanged only brief nods before looking toward the church entrance. Whatever had brought them there, it was clear they had not come to create a spectacle. They had come because someone they deeply respected deserved to be remembered with honor. The first people standing outside the church noticed them almost at the same time. One dark sport utility vehicle became 3, then 5, then a quiet procession stretching along the curb without flashing lights, sirens, or unnecessary attention. The men and women stepping out wore simple navy jackets, rain-darkened boots, and small lapel pins that revealed little to anyone unfamiliar with military service. They spoke softly, greeted one another with respectful handshakes, and formed no crowd around the entrance. Someone inside whispered that they looked like former service members. Another guessed they might be friends of the family. Only when Commander Ethan Hayes walked down the front steps did several of them straighten instinctively, not because anyone had given an order, but because years of shared discipline had become second nature. Hayes greeted each person quietly before looking toward the church doors. There were 30 of them. 30 former Navy SEALs who had traveled overnight from different states after receiving the same message. News photographers gathered across the street immediately pointed their cameras in disbelief. Within minutes, television stations began reporting that an extraordinary group had arrived at the memorial. Speculation spread faster than facts once again. Some commentators wondered whether the veterans intended to confront law enforcement. Others suggested they were preparing a public demonstration. Yet none of those guesses survived the next few minutes. Hayes stepped onto the small stone platform outside the church and gently raised one hand. The conversations faded. The 30 veterans removed their caps together, and stood in two silent lines leading from the sidewalk to the entrance, creating nothing more than a simple honor corridor. No one shouted. No one protested. They merely stood with quiet dignity as Naomi Brooks's family emerged carrying framed photographs and the unopened blue birthday gift. Emma looked from one face to another, surprised to see strangers lowering their heads with genuine respect for her aunt. Hayes knelt beside the little girl and smiled gently. "Your aunt taught my son to love books after I returned from deployment," he said. "She never told anyone she stayed after class without being paid. She just said every child deserved another chapter." Emma hugged the blue package a little tighter. Several parents who had attended Naomi's literacy program quietly wiped away tears as more stories began to surface. One veteran recalled how Naomi organized book drives for children whose families had relocated 3 times in 4 years. Another remembered receiving handwritten progress reports while stationed overseas because Naomi believed deployed parents deserved to celebrate every reading milestone, even from thousands of miles away. She had never asked whether someone wore a uniform. She simply noticed who needed encouragement. Television microphones slowly lowered as reporters realized the gathering was not about anger, but gratitude. Across town, investigators continued reviewing evidence collected from the previous evening. A forensic technician synchronized traffic camera footage with recordings from nearby businesses and commercial vehicles traveling along Highway 41. During that process, one analyst noticed a timestamp that did not align with the official sequence of events. The discrepancy lasted only a matter of seconds, but in any serious investigation, seconds mattered. The room fell silent as additional recordings were requested for comparison. Back at the church, the 30 veterans remained in place until the family departed. Not one of them sought an interview. Not one stepped in front of a camera. They came only to honor a woman whose compassion had quietly strengthened military families long after headlines had forgotten their sacrifices. As the final vehicle pulled away beneath clearing skies, Commander Hayes looked toward the horizon. His phone vibrated once more, and the message appearing on the screen contained only 5 words that immediately changed his expression. "The complete recording has been found." Commander Ethan Hayes drove directly from the church to the county administration building without turning on the radio. The quiet inside the truck gave him room to think about the woman who had spent years changing children's lives without asking for recognition. By the time he reached the parking garage, investigators had already assembled inside a secure conference room where computer monitors displayed synchronized timelines, roadway maps, and digital evidence collected from every available source. Nobody rushed to speak. The atmosphere carried the unmistakable weight of professionals who understood that public trust depended upon patience, accuracy, and facts rather than assumptions. A forensic video analyst connected the newly recovered recording from the commercial delivery truck to the central display. Unlike short clips already circulating online, this recording covered the entire sequence from a fixed angle as the truck slowly approached the roadside. Another technician synchronized the timestamp with highway traffic cameras and dispatch logs. Every clock matched, every second aligned. The room remained silent as the footage played from beginning to end. Naomi Brooks's silver sedan could be seen pulling carefully onto the shoulder with its hazard lights flashing exactly as expected. The driver's window lowered only slightly. Her movements remained slow and deliberate. She stayed inside the vehicle, her hands visible whenever the camera angle allowed. Nothing in the recording supported many of the dramatic claims already spreading across social media. Instead, the video revealed something else that immediately caught the investigators' attention. The official timeline contained a gap of several seconds caused by a technical interruption in one recording system, yet the independent truck camera filled those missing moments with continuous footage. The analysts replayed that section repeatedly, measuring positions, distances, weather conditions, and visibility from multiple reference points. Nobody reached conclusions out loud. They simply documented every observation with meticulous care. Sergeant Linda Alvarez watched quietly from the back of the room before closing her notebook with a slow breath. "Now we have the complete sequence," she said. "Now we let the evidence speak." Across the table, Officer Daniel Mercer sat with lowered eyes. For the first time since the investigation began, he viewed the event from an angle other than his own memory. Stress, darkness, heavy rain, and limited visibility had shaped his perception that night. But the independent recordings presented a broader picture than any single person could have seen alone. He remained silent for several long moments before finally speaking in a subdued voice. "I should have slowed everything down." No one answered immediately. Accountability inside the room did not come through raised voices or public humiliation. It came through careful examination, truthful statements, and acceptance of responsibility under established legal procedures. Outside the building, reporters waited behind barricades hoping for dramatic developments. Instead, the sheriff's office released a brief statement confirming that additional evidence had been recovered, that the investigation remained active, and that every conclusion would be based upon verified facts. The measured response frustrated some commentators who wanted immediate answers, but it reassured others that the process would not be driven by speculation. Later that afternoon, Commander Hayes stopped once more at Brookside Elementary. Several students were planting a young oak tree beside the school library in Naomi's memory. One little boy looked up at Hayes and asked, "Do you think people will remember her?" Hayes smiled gently as sunlight filtered through the branches overhead. "Good people are remembered every time someone chooses kindness because of them." At that same moment, inside the sheriff's office, investigators completed the final synchronization of every available recording, and the finished report was prepared for independent review, setting the stage for a decision that would affect every life connected to that rainy evening on Highway 41. Several months later, spring returned to Savannah with warm sunlight filtering through the branches of the young oak tree outside Brookside Elementary. Fresh green leaves now stretched toward the sky where only bare limbs had stood during the cold weeks following Naomi Brooks's passing. Children hurried across the playground carrying library books instead of backpacks for a special reading celebration that had become an annual tradition. Above the entrance to the renovated school library hung a new wooden sign carved with simple words that reflected the life Naomi had quietly lived: the Naomi Brooks Reading Room. There were no grand statues or dramatic monuments inside, only shelves filled with books, comfortable chairs by the windows, and a promise engraved on a bronze plaque that every child would always have access to free tutoring regardless of family income. The program was funded by donations from teachers, military families, local businesses, and veterans whose lives Naomi had touched without ever expecting anything in return. Commander Ethan Hayes often visited the library. During those reading afternoons, he never arrived in uniform. He simply sat among the children, turning pages with them while volunteers continued the work Naomi had started years before. Every week, another family joined the program, and every week another child discovered that someone believed in their future. The unopened blue birthday gift had found its own place inside a glass display case beside Naomi's favorite photograph. Emma eventually decided the package should never be unwrapped because it represented something greater than a present. It reminded everyone that love could remain unfinished and still continue changing lives. Visitors frequently stopped to read the handwritten note attached beneath it. It simply said, "Kindness is never late. Someone will always receive it." Across town, the independent review of the investigation reached its conclusion through the legal process established for cases of public concern. The complete evidence, including synchronized recordings and witness statements, allowed investigators to reconstruct the events with clarity. Recommendations were issued, additional training standards were adopted, and new policies emphasized communication, patience, and careful assessment during roadside encounters. Officer Daniel Mercer accepted responsibility for the decisions he had made that evening and publicly expressed his sorrow to Naomi's family. His statement did not erase the loss, nor did anyone expect it to. Yet acknowledging responsibility became an important step toward restoring trust and ensuring meaningful change rather than repeating old mistakes. Sergeant Linda Alvarez later told a group of new recruits, "Confidence protects no one unless it is guided by humility." Those words soon became part of the department's leadership training. On a quiet Saturday morning nearly 1 year later, Hayes walked alone through the library before the children arrived. Sunlight poured across polished wooden floors, filling the room with the same gentle warmth Naomi had always carried into her classroom. He paused beside the window where a little girl had carefully placed a handwritten bookmark inside a favorite storybook. On the bookmark, she had copied Naomi's classroom message in careful pencil letters. Kindness is something you practice, even when nobody is watching. Hay smiled softly before looking outside at the oak tree, swaying in the spring breeze. The laughter of children drifted through the open windows, blending with birdsong and turning pages. In that quiet moment, he understood that legacies are rarely built by power, wealth, or recognition. They are built one patient conversation, one generous act, and one open heart at a time. Long after headlines disappeared and cameras turned away, Naomi Brooks continued teaching, not from the front of a classroom, but through every life that chose compassion because of hers.